was writing my book, I was convinced that I was a witch. When you're working on a big creative project and you've gotten to the place where your subconscious clicks on and is looking for all those connections because you're working on it regularly, some really, truly amazing magic starts to happen in your life. So I'm going to tell you a story of this kind of magic that happened in my writing of my book. Art is About Being Whole. There is a chapter. It's one of my favorite chapters that I wrote. I had the best time writing this chapter. You can see each chapter is an artwork. And I used the poster from the painting from the poster from the movie Jaws for this chapter. The chapter was about my burnout that I have been experiencing over the last few years. I'm finally done with my burnout. I'm on the other side. So I'm writing about this burnout. And each chapter has this artwork that I kind of feature. But for this burnout chapter, I couldn't figure out the right artwork. I kept experimenting with different ones, and I started with a different artwork, but nothing just felt right. That's not something you can force. So I was just going about my business, writing, working on other parts of the book while my subconscious and my conscious brain were thinking about it on and off throughout my life. And then I was reading a book of fiction. The book is Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt, and a brilliant book. It is so delightful. But there was a line in the book that stopped me in my tracks about burnout. I was writing this chapter at the time when I read this line. The line was, "She understands what it means to never be able to stop moving, lest you find yourself unable to breathe." And I read that line and it just caught my breath. I was like, oh, I deeply know that feeling, because at the time of my life I was writing about, I was working nonstop. I had always had 2 jobs, nonstop working, because when I would slow down, that's when the bad feelings would come. That's when the anxiety would hit. And I was so uncomfortable feeling those feelings that I had to keep myself so busy. So that line hits me and I'm like, oh, yes. And then I was like, that's amazing. I want to include this in the book, but I was like, let's fact check this, because what if it's not true? So I start Googling sharks and I'm learning all about how sharks breathe. And indeed, there are many sharks who have to keep moving to be able to breathe. Some of them can stop, but not all of them. And so I'm like thinking about sharks now. And so I start talking about sharks in the book, and I'm just like, why am I talking about sharks in this book? What? And so then it led to, what if the artwork has sharks in it and I can spread out this metaphor and really go for it? So I start looking for shark paintings, right? And then I come upon the painting from the poster from the movie Jaws. And I was like, this is it. I was so excited because it is exactly what I was writing about. Exactly what I was writing about. So if you see in the painting, there's the girl swimming at the top and she keeps swimming. The shark is underneath her. And so I go through this whole thought of she has to keep swimming. She has to keep swimming. If she stops, that shark is going to come up and eat her. So there was all of these metaphors that I could use. I was like a lighthouse, and I was talking about the waves and all this stuff. It was so fun because there was so much in that metaphor that was so perfect for what I was writing about. But it felt so magical, because that's what happens when you're working on a big creative project. You can't force these things. And a lot of the time it is this sense of you're working while you're waiting. There's a quote from Pablo Picasso that's, inspiration exists, but it has to find you working. So I was day to day working on my book, and just knowing and waiting that when that answer is ready to come, it will come. And it's a trust in the process. It's just trust in myself. It's a trust in my subconscious. It's a trust in all the things that the answers that I need for my project will come when they're ready to come. And they'll come from any number of things, because your subconscious is always looking, and always it's okay. We're writing about this. What connections can we find? And to me, I feel like there's a spiritual universal component too. That's the universe put that book in my hands at that time for that reason, for that quote. I felt that's what it felt true to me, that I was meant to read that book at that time. And I do believe that artworks enter your life when you need them. And that book is what I needed at that time, just for that quote. And then, of course, the rest of the book was amazing and I loved it. But that is one of the sheer creative joys that happens when you're working on a big project, when you allow yourself to be in that messy place. It was stressful going, oh, what if I never figure it out? But it's a surrendering to the creative process that makes the joys and the magic of it so exciting. And that's one example of the magic that happened when writing this book, but there are so many other examples. And nearly every fiction book I read, and I read a lot, nearly every fiction book I read made its way into this book. I have quotes throughout it related to what I'm talking about, and I think every single one of them is from a book I was reading at the time, or a book I read during the process of writing my book, because those books became a part of the process. Because as long as you're working consistently on your creative project, you're always working on it, even when you're not working on it. And that's why you need to give yourself space and time. So start your project, because magical things happen. And if you need support through those messy middle times, through that time when you're not trusting that what's going to happen is going to happen, and you need that help, reach out, because I do creative midwifery. I help you birth your project into the world, and you'll need support to do that. It is so hard, but it is so fun and so magical. Totally worth it.